Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. About 3 years ago, I fulfilled a lifelong dream by purchasing 30 acres of pristine forest property that borders a state park. I'm not some wealthy tech mogul or anything like that. I'm just a regular guy who saved up for years to afford this slice of paradise. The property cost me most of my savings, but it was worth every penny for the peace and solitude it provides. The land is absolutely beautiful. Dense oak and pine trees, a small creek running through the middle, and wildlife everywhere. I've always been passionate about nature photography and sustainable forestry, so this place became my sanctuary where I could escape the noise of everyday life and pursue my hobbies. When I first bought the property, I made sure to do everything by the book. I had a professional land survey done to mark the exact boundaries, which cost me nearly $2,000 but was absolutely necessary. Following local regulations, I posted high-quality aluminum signs saying private property, no trespassing every 100 feet along the entire property line. At the main access point, I installed a sturdy locked gate with a larger, more detailed sign explaining that this was private land. I also set up several motion-activated trail cameras throughout the property. My main goal was wildlife observation. I've captured some amazing footage of deer, foxes, and even a black bear that occasionally wanders through. But as it turned out, those cameras would serve a much more important purpose than I initially imagined. For the first couple of years, everything was peaceful. I'd spend my weekends hiking my own trails, clearing invasive species, and planting native trees. I built a small cabin where I could stay overnight sometimes, just listening to the sounds of the forest and working on my photography. It was exactly the kind of life I'd dreamed about. That tranquility started to change about 6 months ago when I began noticing small signs of intrusion. At first, it was just little things that I tried to dismiss. A granola bar wrapper near my favorite creek spot. Footprints from hiking boots that definitely weren't mine. Most concerning was a small handmade trail marker tied to one of my oak trees, suggesting someone was trying to establish their own path through my property. I decided to check the SD cards from my trail cameras to see if I could figure out what was happening. What I found made my blood boil. The same woman appeared in footage from multiple cameras over several different dates. She was a middle-aged lady with that particular entitled demeanor that just screamed trouble. The first clip showed her walking right up to one of my no trespassing signs, actually sneering at it, and then waving someone else past it like it was some kind of joke. In another clip, she was letting 2 large dogs run completely off-leash through my property, chasing squirrels and disturbing the wildlife I'd been so carefully trying to protect and photograph. But the clip that really got to me showed her sitting on a fallen log, eating some kind of snack, and then casually tossing her trash into the bushes before walking away. Here was someone who was clearly trying to present herself as a nature lover, but had zero respect for the environment she claimed to care about. I was annoyed, but decided against immediate confrontation. I hoped that if I ever encountered her in person, I could handle the situation politely, and she'd respect my property rights once she understood the situation. That hope was completely misplaced. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon in early fall when everything came to a head. I was doing some light trail maintenance, using a small handsaw to clear a birch limb that had fallen across one of my walking paths after a recent storm. It was peaceful work, the kind of meditative activity that had drawn me to this lifestyle in the first place. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching through the trees. Before I could even look up properly, a woman's voice cut through the quiet forest air like a chainsaw. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just come in here and cut down trees. This is a pristine, natural environment." I looked up to see the same woman from my trail camera footage standing about 20 feet away with her hands on her hips, glaring at me like I'd just committed some kind of environmental war crime. I carefully placed my handsaw on the ground to show I wasn't any kind of threat and responded as calmly as I could. "Hello there, I'm actually the owner of this property. This is private land and you're currently trespassing." She let out this dramatic scoff that probably could have been heard in the next county. "The owner? Don't be ridiculous. Beautiful nature like this belongs to everyone. I lead a hiking group through here every weekend." I pointed to the clearly visible private property sign that was nailed to an oak tree about 15 feet from where we were standing. She glanced at it dismissively and waved her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "You probably put that up yourself to scare people away. That's illegal, you know." My patience was starting to wear thin, but I tried to maintain a reasonable tone. "Ma'am, I have the deed, the tax records, and the survey maps to prove this is my land. I'm now asking you for the final time to please leave my property." That's when she completely lost it. Her face turned bright red and she whipped out her phone with this theatrical flourish that would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. "That's it, I'm calling 911. There's a hostile man here with a weapon, destroying the forest and threatening me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was standing there on my property after weeks of documented trespassing, calling the police and deliberately lying about the situation. I realized things had just taken a very dangerous turn, so I pulled out my own phone and started recording the interaction for my own protection. "I'm going to wait right here for the officers to arrive," I told her, making sure my voice was calm and measured for the recording. She spent the next 15 minutes pacing around and talking loudly on her phone, occasionally pointing at me dramatically while she spun her tale of victimhood to whoever would listen. I stayed exactly where I was, occasionally checking my phone to make sure it was still recording. When the police arrived, it was with 2 patrol cars and flashing lights. The officers approached with obvious caution, clearly having been told they were responding to a dangerous situation. They instructed me to step away from the handsaw and keep my hands visible, which I did immediately. The woman launched into an Academy Award-worthy performance as the terrified victim. She told the officers that I had been acting aggressively and threatened her when she caught me illegally cutting down trees on public land. Her voice was shaking with just the right amount of fear and indignation. When the first officer turned to me, I kept my voice calm and factual. I explained that my name was on the property deed, that this woman had been repeatedly trespassing for weeks despite clear signage, and that when I politely asked her to leave, she refused and made a false police report. The officer maintained professional neutrality as he asked me to prove my ownership claim. This was the moment I'd been preparing for without even knowing it. I unlocked my phone and opened the county GIS app that shows property lines overlaid on satellite imagery. There was my name, clear as day, listed as the owner of the entire 30-acre parcel we were standing on. I handed over my driver's license, which matched the name on the property record perfectly. Then I explained about the trail cameras and the weeks of documented trespassing, including footage of the same woman ignoring signs, littering, and letting her dogs run wild on my land. The shift in the officer's demeanor was immediate and obvious. The lead officer examined my phone display, looked at my ID, and then turned to look at the woman with a completely different expression. The second officer walked over to inspect the private property sign she had claimed was fake or illegal. When the officer turned back to address the woman, her smug expression had completely vanished. He informed her that she was the one who had been breaking the law through repeated criminal trespassing on clearly marked private property. The officer then asked me the question I'd been hoping for. "Sir, do you wish to press charges for trespassing?" I paused for a moment, genuinely considering my options. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have just wanted a warning issued. But this woman had deliberately escalated the situation by filing a false police report and claiming I was a dangerous person with a weapon. That kind of false accusation could have resulted in a tragic misunderstanding that put everyone at risk. Normally, I would just want a warning issued, I told the officer. But given that she knowingly filed a false report claiming I was a dangerous man with a weapon, which could have resulted in a very serious misunderstanding, yes, I absolutely want to press charges. The woman was issued a formal citation for criminal trespassing. The officer gave her a stern lecture about the serious legal consequences of misusing the 911 system, and mentioned that the district attorney's office might follow up on the false reporting charges as well. She was then escorted off my property, completely humiliated and facing real legal consequences for her entitled behavior. After the police left, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again, but this time in a much more satisfying way. About a week later, I was curious about who exactly this woman was, so I did some internet searching using the name from the police report. What I discovered was absolutely perfect. She ran a monetized blog and social media presence called something like Nature Wellness Walks, where she presented herself as an environmental guru and charged people money for guided hiking experiences. Her whole online persona was built around being this enlightened nature lover who respected the environment and taught others to do the same. She had hundreds of followers who believed she was some kind of outdoor wisdom teacher. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw. I obtained a copy of the public police report from the county clerk's office, which detailed her trespassing citation and the circumstances that led to it. Then I crafted a very careful, factual post for our local community Facebook group. I made sure the wording was precise and unbiased, simply sharing the facts of what had happened. The post explained that the organizer of these wellness woods walks had been cited by police for criminal trespassing on private land after refusing to leave and making a false 911 report. I included one of the crystal clear trail camera photos showing her throwing trash into the bushes and mentioned that anyone interested could request the public police report from the county clerk's office. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. It turned out that several people had paid her money for what they now realized were guided hikes on private property without the owner's permission. Others had followed her blog and social media accounts, believing she was a genuine environmental advocate. Her blog and social media pages were flooded with comments calling out her hypocrisy. People who had paid for her services demanded refunds. Local hiking groups distanced themselves from her. Her carefully crafted online reputation crumbled under the weight of her own documented actions. Within a few weeks, her entire nature wellness business had collapsed. Her social media accounts went silent, and her website disappeared. The woman who had tried to claim moral authority over my use of my own property had been exposed as a fraud and a hypocrite by her own behavior. I also received numerous private messages from other local landowners thanking me for taking a stand against trespassing. Several people shared their own stories of dealing with entitled people who thought private property signs didn't apply to them. It became clear that by standing up for my rights, I had performed a broader public service for the entire community. The most satisfying part wasn't the revenge aspect, though. It was simply having my peace and quiet restored. A few months have passed now, and the trespassing has completely stopped. My trail cameras capture only the wildlife they were originally intended to monitor. I can work on my property maintenance and photography without worrying about confrontations with entitled strangers. Last weekend, I was sitting by the same creek where this woman had been littering months earlier, editing some photos I'd taken of a family of deer. The forest was completely quiet except for natural sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling in the wind, water trickling over stones. It was exactly the kind of tranquility I'd bought this property to enjoy. The whole experience taught me an important lesson about standing up for what's right. I never wanted the drama or confrontation, but sometimes protecting your peace requires drawing firm, uncrossable lines. The satisfaction didn't come from revenge against someone who wronged me, but from justice being served and order being restored. My property is posted, surveyed, and protected. The trail cameras keep watching, and most importantly, I can continue to enjoy the sanctuary I worked so hard to create, knowing that entitled people can't just take what isn't theirs without facing real consequences. The forest is quiet again, just as it should be. Update: 6 months later, the full consequences come to light. I thought my last post would be the end of this saga, but several people asked for an update, and honestly, the aftermath has been even more satisfying than I expected. A lot has happened in the past 6 months that I think you'll find interesting. First, the legal consequences for the trespasser turned out to be more serious than either of us initially realized. About 2 months after the incident, I received a call from the district attorney's office. Apparently, they had decided to pursue charges for filing a false police report in addition to the trespassing citation. The prosecutor explained that they take false 911 calls very seriously because they waste emergency resources and can put everyone involved in dangerous situations. She ended up pleading guilty to both charges and received 6 months of probation, a significant fine, and had to perform community service specifically related to environmental cleanup. The irony of someone who claimed to be an environmental advocate having to pick up litter as court-ordered punishment wasn't lost on anyone, but the real consequences came from the destruction of her online business and reputation. What I discovered through some of my new contacts in the local outdoor community was that her nature wellness walks scam was even worse than I initially thought. It turns out she had been charging people between $50 and $100 per person for what she called exclusive access to pristine wilderness areas. She wasn't just trespassing on my property. She was making money by bringing groups of paying customers to trespass on multiple private properties throughout the region. She had been doing this for over 2 years. Several other landowners came forward after seeing my Facebook post, reporting that they had also caught her leading groups through their private property without permission. One farmer told me she had been bringing groups through his pastures where he keeps livestock, which could have been extremely dangerous. Another property owner said she had found evidence of campfires on his land after her groups had been through. The State Park Service also got involved when they learned she had been advertising some of her walks as taking place in restricted areas of the actual state park. She didn't have any kind of permit or authorization to lead commercial groups anywhere, let alone in protected wilderness areas. Her former customers started a group chat to compare notes about what they had paid for versus what they actually received. Many of them realized they had been charged premium prices for basic hikes on land she had no right to access. Several people mentioned that she had encouraged them to ignore fake private property signs telling them that beautiful nature belonged to everyone. The group of former customers ended up filing a class action lawsuit against her for fraud and false advertising. From what I heard through the local grapevine, the legal fees and settlement costs pretty much wiped out whatever money she had made from her illegal business. Her social media accounts never came back online. Someone told me she moved out of the area entirely, though I haven't confirmed that and honestly don't care enough to investigate further. On a more positive note, the whole incident led to some great connections with my neighbors and the local outdoor community. The county sheriff's department started doing more regular patrols of rural properties after several landowners reported similar trespassing issues. They even created an information sheet about property rights and trespassing laws that they distribute to hiking groups and outdoor clubs. I've become something of an unofficial resource for other landowners dealing with similar problems. I've helped 3 different neighbors set up their own trail camera systems and shared information about proper signage requirements. We've created an informal network where we share information about persistent trespassers and support each other in protecting our properties. The best part is that my property has remained completely peaceful since the incident. My trail cameras still capture amazing wildlife footage, but zero unauthorized human activity. I've been able to complete several habitat improvement projects and have documented some really encouraging wildlife population increases. Last month, I finally got footage of a mother bear with 2 cubs using the creek area regularly, which suggests they feel safe and undisturbed enough to establish it as part of their territory. I also captured video of a family of foxes that is denned somewhere on the property. These are exactly the kinds of wildlife interactions I hoped for when I bought this land. I did make one change to my property management approach. I installed a few additional trail cameras focused specifically on the main access points, and I check them more regularly now. I also added motion sensor lights near the gate area, not because I'm expecting more problems, but because the whole experience taught me the value of being proactive about property security. The overwhelming response from the community has been supportive. I've received messages from people thanking me for standing up to someone who is exploiting both private landowners and naive customers. Several people said my post inspired them to be more careful about who they trust for outdoor activities and to always verify that guides have proper permissions for their activities. One unexpected benefit has been connecting with other landowners who share my interests in conservation and sustainable forestry. We've started an informal group that shares resources and knowledge about habitat management, native species restoration, and wildlife photography. It's led to some great friendships and collaborative projects. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm glad I stood my ground despite the initial stress and confrontation. Not only did it protect my property and peace of mind, but it also helped expose someone who was systematically exploiting both landowners and customers while damaging the very environment she claimed to protect. The woman who tried to claim moral authority over my use of my own land turned out to be running an illegal business that harmed multiple people and properties. By simply documenting the truth and sharing it with the community, the problem solved itself through natural consequences. My advice to anyone dealing with similar issues is to document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Most people respect clearly posted private property boundaries, but the few who don't will only stop when they face real consequences for their actions. The forest remains my peaceful sanctuary, the wildlife continues to thrive, and I can pursue my hobbies without worrying about entitled trespassers disrupting the balance I've worked so hard to create. Sometimes justice really does prevail when you stand up for what's right. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My dad died December 1st, 2022. He briefly lived with me before his passing after a long stint of being chronically ill for the past 15+ years. As his health declined, he relied more on my mom for things. Prior to this, she was never a great person and fully took advantage of his disability and mobility issues as he declined. For years, she claimed to be separated and divorced, talking to other men on the internet. She made claims many times she was going to move away and marry someone else. In addition, she took advantage of him financially. We tried every legal avenue we could find to have her kicked out, arrested, or force her out, but those attempts were met with responses that it was a civil matter and there was nothing that could be done. He made me durable POA and added me to all his accounts. This is a small portion of her abuse, but I promise her actions were no less than neglectful and exploitive. I'd tried for years to get my dad to move in with me, but he wasn't leaving the house he worked so hard to pay for. I brought him home on hospice the day after Thanksgiving and made sure his final days were the best they could be. After meeting with the funeral home to carry out his final wishes, I was told they required consent from my mother to allow me to cremate him. It was no surprise she initially told me no and only agreed after I allowed her to keep the Social Security survivor benefits, which would have been hers anyway. I wrote his obituary and left her out of it. There was not a single word or mention he'd ever been married or had a spouse. I didn't feel she deserved to be recognized or viewed as a grieving widow when she spent their marriage as a crappy spouse in person. She lost her mind, and there were many questions from friends and family alike. I've spent years in therapy working through maternal narcissistic abuse and believe if she didn't want me to talk about it, she shouldn't have done it. When people asked about it, I was honest about the years of abuse my father and I endured from her. I've completely ruined the public image and victim complex she spent years creating. I might be the villain in in this scenario, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. The next one is a malicious compliance story. In light of all the generic AI slop trash this sub has been flooded with, I figured I'd give my MC story that I've been holding on to for a while. It's been many years since I worked for the company this relates to, but if you have any knowledge of the industry, then you know it's an acronym for My Ride. Being a private ambulance company, they acquired the contract to provide transport of patients to the hospital when they call 911. The city-county pays a flat rate in the contract to make sure that an ambulance responds and arrives on scene within 8 minutes and 59 seconds from the time of dispatch. On top of that, our company was allowed to bill the patient's insurance for the transportation and cost of treatment. Given our location, that is a pretty reasonable criteria. Per the contract, we were allowed to have 10% of our response times to be what was called late response, meaning we arrived on scene 9 minutes or later. This on-time versus late ratio was what we called compliance. 98% compliance were golden, 89% compliance. Emails started going out and phones started ringing. The thing is, we had to maintain daily compliance. We could have 0 compliance from midnight to 3 a.m., but as long as the compliance picked up and we met 90% or greater by midnight the end of the day, we were considered compliant. But here's the real kicker. Our management was the only entity responsible for reporting compliance to the county, and that means numbers were scrubbed and fudged upside down, left and right. They used special delays or exemptions that would drop the response times from the reports and consider them outliers, generally used for if an ambulance is delayed by a train crossing, construction, severe weather conditions, etc. But management abused these delays in their reports to maintain compliance. Now, being responsible for the safety and care of critically sick or injured people, you'd think that they would adequately staff the ambulances to handle the population of our service area and throw a little extra staff on top just to be safe and make sure they could handle anything that happens, right? Ha ha. No, they're trying to make money. If they can maintain compliance with less people, they did it. Hell, even if they couldn't make compliance, they'd use the delay exemptions to make it look like they were compliant. But it's not like anyone was auditing them anyways. We were simply understaffed. We constantly ran at what's called level 0, in which the level refers to the number of ambulances available to respond to calls. If corporate had their way, if you could run a level 0 constantly and still make compliance, we would be operating at peak efficiency, and the shareholders were happy. We were pressured to unsafely blow through stop signs and red lights, drive faster than reasonably necessary. Hell, even our supervisor taught us the trick of using the cruise control to bypass the speed limiter on our trucks. We were tired, overworked, and spent more time driving in high-stress environments than the DOT would ever even let truck drivers get close to. We complained to the union, we tried whistleblowing to the county, but nothing changed. We'd had it. The contract renewal was coming up. We had to be perfect with response times and look good so we could secure the next 4 years of service. But we all agreed. Enough was enough. We started following the laws regarding Code 3 driving, lights and sirens. We stopped at every stop sign or red light. We drove no faster than we deemed safe for conditions. We sandbagged the ever-living duck out of our response times and drove compliance straight into the ground. Unless the response was absolutely critical, every bellyache and stubbed toe, which was 90% of our calls, we took our reasonable, sweet-ass time getting there. The exemptions couldn't even mask the failure of our compliance. 2 weeks in and many meetings with supervision, they couldn't write us up for being safer, and they started to staff more ambulances to regain compliance in time for the end of the month. It lasted a while, but I sought out employment elsewhere and haven't looked back since. I miss the job, but not the company. The next one is an entitled people story. My sister herself is a terrible driver. I've spoken at length about how she'd drink and drive, how she's a lead foot, texts while driving, etc. She'd drive a minivan 70 in a 35 zone with kids in the car and say the kids loved it because it was like a roller coaster. She even scared her eldest son by driving so fast that his hat blew off and he didn't have his head out the window. He was scared to even open the window of other vehicles while riding with other people for a while. But my sister is just as bad as a ride-along, because she's either a backseat driver, gives terrible directions, drunk, or insults your driving. And for the record, I wanted to report her bad driving to the police. But my family went off on me for even having the idea, which is the only reason I never did. I currently don't know where my sister lives, or if she even has a car. She's a drug addict, not exactly swimming in money, and her eldest son is an adult now. And yes, I'm aware I should have still done something. I've been called a coward, and I owned up to that. But my sister had us all mentally beaten down for years, and used her kids as emotional blackmail. But now she can't do that anymore. Let's start with seatbelts. My nephews for a while had a bad habit of ripping their seatbelts off as soon as their destination was in sight. I'd have them in my car, and as soon as they could see home off in the distance, they ripped their seatbelts off. I got mad at them several times and always forced them to rebuckle till we were parked. They'd give me grief, say it was no big deal, etc., but I held firm. You ride with me, the belts stay on till we are parked. After this happened several times, they finally got the memo and stopped doing it. They wouldn't tell me where they learned it from, though. I thought it might have been their father, but nope, it turned out to be my sister. I was driving her home, and as soon as home was in sight, she ripped her seatbelt off. And I went off on her for doing it and setting a bad example for her kids. She called me dramatic and tried to act like it was no big deal. But I didn't let it go, and hammed her till she said she'd never do it again. She did, but I hammered her again until she stopped. My sister absolutely could not stand anyone driving slow when riding with them. Every freaking time she'd ride with me, unless she was zoned out on her phone, she'd complain about me driving too slow. I'm sorry, I was going the speed limit. She twice debated how fast I should be driving through a school zone. The zone was 20 mph on weekdays from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., unless it was weekends or summer. But when school was not active, it was 40 mph through that zone. I slowed down to exactly 40, and my sister started demanding I go 45 and claimed it was 45 through there. And she refused to believe me when I said it was 40. Thankfully, the school zone had more than one sign, and I pointed to one that said 40 on it, and she pouted and shut up. This situation actually happened a second time. My sister would act grateful for rides, but then would either distract you and think it was funny when you get mad, or insult your driving. Once when I was driving my nephews in her home, her arm shot out in front of my face and she yelled, "Dear," scared the crap out of me, and she thought it was hilarious, even though I could have lost control of the car. I went off on her and she forced out an insincere apology. Thankfully, she never did that again. Even though my sister is a terrible driver, a lead foot, neglectful of her own vehicles, guilty of multiple accidents and a DUI, she always criticized my driving. Once I forgot to use my turn signal when pulling into a parking lot, even though I carefully slowed down. She went off on me about the turn signal. Never mind, I had her and 3 very distracting kids in the car, and then after I pulled into the parking lot, she pointed at me and said to her kids, "You see? I'd never forget to do that." The only reason I didn't go off on her was because the kids were there. Then there was my sister giving directions. She was fine if she wasn't drunk or distracted. Once when she paid me to drive her and her friends out bar hopping, when it was time to go home, my sister insisted I take her way on the back roads. And I kept telling her the main road with practically no traffic on it was faster at night. But no, she had to have her way. She got us lost in a maze of neighborhoods. Once I figured out where the main road was again, I headed for that, and she threw a tantrum because I wasn't going her way. We got on the main road and sailed right on out in less than a minute. And she kept complaining her way would have been faster. Then there was when she ended up homeless after burning nearly all friend and family bridges. I was driving her and all her stuff to the place she was allowed to crash for a couple days, and she kept zoning out on her phone and wouldn't look up to give me directions till the absolute last second. And I had to yell at her to look up and tell me where to go. And then she'd get mad and say she was busy, like I could just automatically know where to go without her. She put me through days of that crap. It was about that time I went NC with her. Then there was driving her while she was drunk. Now that was a nightmare. Once she and her husband both got drunk and I had to drive her and her entire family home. As soon as we were all in the car and I'd backed out, she suddenly grabbed my shifter and shifted it into drive with a big grin on her face. Then was angry I was mad at her for doing it. She acted like it was no big deal and I should have been grateful she did it. She apologized later, but I kinda doubt it was genuine, and she probably just didn't want to lose her emergency brother taxi. Then, of course, was her drunken backseat driving, which I explained in the above paragraph. And then there was the time she drove to work in the morning drunk. She worked 2 miles away at the time. She had to call me and beg me to come get her because her boss was sending her home since she showed up drunk and her boss wasn't letting her drive herself back. I confronted her about why she was drunk in the morning and went to work like that, and she admitted to me that she just doesn't like being told what to do. I told her that when you have a job, being told what to do is par for the course, unless you're the boss, which she was not. She just looked bitter and got out of my truck. The last major incident, I drove her while she was drunk. She had a friend with her, and we stopped at her friend's place because her friend wanted to have a sleepover at my sister's place, and they just wanted to pick up some clothes. I waited in my truck for 45 minutes before finally going in to get them. I caught them sitting on the floor with a bottle of booze, and my sister looked up at me like she'd just been caught by a parent. They just decided to get more wasted while I was waiting for them. My sister couldn't even tell she wasn't at home and kept talking about the carpet. I had to forcibly drag her out and throw her in my truck and buckle her myself. Then on the way home, she unbuckled to have a slapping play fight with her friend in the back seat, climbed over the center console, shoved her butt in my face, and then literally got stuck between the back seat and center console. So I had to pull her out. And then she kept trying to walk to the road and say home was that way, so I had to drag her into her trailer, throw her onto her bed, and tell her I was done before going home. I went off on her the next day and made her and her friend reimburse me for wasted gas of letting my truck idle for nearly an hour waiting for them. Then there was the crap my sister would say while drunk. She used to pay me to drive her out to bars, and she'd say we'd be out by 10 or 11 and would somehow push it to 1 a.m. She has no consideration for being on someone else's time and acted like I was a killjoy for wanting to go home. But on one of the last times I drove her to a bar before she had her boyfriend take over, she suddenly started bawling while wasted and literally told me she was just waiting for our mother to die, and no one would be playing Ozzy at her funeral. And right around the time I cut her off after driving her around for days, she told me our mother was going to die for crossing her because apparently a few people she'd been wronged by passed away. But after years of her saying and doing crap like that, I finally snapped and blocked her on everything about a year ago, and my life has been much better since. Anyway, thank you.